Here with me now to discuss the importance of online freedom of speech is John Matze, the CEO of the social network Parler. John, last week we saw President Trump take some action regarding social media companies. He signed an executive order really taking aim at this thing called Section 230, I believe it's called, and that has to do with the liabilities and the rights that some of these social media companies have. Do you think that was a right first step for the president?
I think his actions to acknowledge the problems with Section 230 were justified. I do actually support Section 230 for the most part, but I think that there are some issues with bad actors, and I think that's what Trump was trying to address, is the bad actor clause, and also not putting government funding towards companies that are acting with political bias. And I think that was the right step. And Twitter's made it abundantly clear that they are a publisher and they are not a platform or town square. They've done this, like you said earlier in this segment, about fact-checking President Trump. I think fact-checking anybody is wrong. I don't think that Trump is the only one that's being fact-checked, and I think that this is a widespread problem. As you've also mentioned, Twitter has been pretty active in allowing Antifa and promoting violence at these protests. Just last night, I read a really horrible tweet about calling to violence in the suburbs, and this was by an Antifa group right before the page was taken down. That tweet was out there for quite a long time, whereas the president's tweet about, when we loot, we shoot, whatever that was then censored. So there is a large bias. They've made it very clear that there's a bias here.
And it does raise the question, too, that if Twitter doesn't fact-check something, does it assume that they agree with that position? And I would like to think no, because there's plenty of very vile things on the internet that Twitter has not made the decision to fact-check, to take down. But it does raise that allegation of bias. And I do want to talk about your company, too, Parler. It's an alternative to Twitter. But, of course, Twitter right now has essentially a monopoly over this field. So when you're trying to tell people to come to your platform in order to at least give some competition to this social media company, what can you do in order to really try to at least be on the same level playing field with a company that has billions of dollars invested in it and already has this market control?
So they do have a large market share. They also have a lot of money. They have a lot of power. However, we've made it abundantly clear that even us with very little money, but we have a lot of really talented engineers and staff, and we're really dedicated to our cause, that we can make a huge dent in what they're doing. Last week, we saw a surge of hundreds of thousands of users overnight.
Oh, wow.
Because of what happened to President Trump. We saw Eric Trump joined Parler. We had his wife Laura did join as well. We had Brad Parscale was using it last week, as well as Trump's right-hand man in the White House for running Twitter. They all joined and they were all active on Parler last week, and we saw a massive surge. So it's possible to take their power away from them. We choose which platform to use, and so the best way to support somebody taking down Twitter organically in the marketplace is to participate in Twexit, TWEXIT. Basically, it's a website we put together so you can say your final statement to Twitter about how you're going to exit and stop them in the marketplace in a fair and level playing ground.
And I want to talk about that Section 230 order by the president, too, because that is something that was done by executive order, meaning whoever comes into office next could undo that themselves. Unless Congress takes action in order to make that something permanent, we might not see any solution to this issue. So on the other hand of this the conversation, is there another way to approach this, such as maybe making an internet bill of rights or making internet platform access a civil right where you can't just arbitrarily be taken away from it? Because some of these big accounts, for example, if you have 100,000 followers, that's almost equivalent to a 6-digit type of paycheck. I mean, that is an asset right there that a lot of people would die for. Is there another way to go about this issue?
Well, a few points. One is, for example, our company takes your ownership over your following very seriously. Twitter, on the other hand, in their terms of service, their community guidelines, they own your following. They own everything about what you're doing on there. So, you signed your rights away over when you did that. And so as a publication, they can censor and manipulate that as they see fit. However, with what you mentioned about the executive order, I don't know that his executive order is actually going to have long-term effects that could be undone by somebody else, because a lot of what his executive order did is call the FCC or the different groups in government office to actually look into Section 230 and look at modifying it or updating it. So a lot of what he did is make a call to action to do something about this, not necessarily that it in and of itself is actually taking any action.
And a lot of his supporters, too, have been calling for this type of action for a long time. I mean, it's just right now where we're having this conversation, but this has been something that conservatives in particular have been saying for a long time, but not only conservatives as well. I mean, anything that really goes against the status quo is being banned to some degree on Twitter. We could talk about the beginning of the coronavirus. I saw people who weren't just conservatives, liberals as well, kind of putting out different ideas about the origins of the coronavirus, where it started, and they got banned from the platform for that. And now, a couple weeks later, we hear some administration officials saying that maybe some of those concerns were real to begin with. So I think it's Twitter picking the dialogue that's taking place, and that's something, to me, is very problematic. But go ahead.
And that's what a publisher does. That's what a publisher does, right? They define what they want, and that's their story, and that's what they're running with. And by banning Zero Hedge, I think that's what you're referring to, is when they banned Zero Hedge for saying, hey, there are different ideas about the origin of the coronavirus. We need to think about this. I don't think they even explicitly endorsed any conspiracy theory or anything. They just said we should consider alternative ideas. And Twitter was like, no, we're not having this. They're permanently banned. And so you can find them on Parler as well. But they have good information. I don't see why you'd ban somebody over that.
And even if they didn't, it's still not the job of a social media platform to make that decision. It's up to the viewers, the people who are using that platform. And of course, if it was something very, very dangerous, that's a different conversation to be had. But that's not exactly what's happening right here. John Matze, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for coming on tonight.